Hello, I wanted to talk about design thinking, which connects with the design processes that we've spoken of before. And the first thing to consider with design thinking are some of the vehicles for communicating ideas. And just to go through these quickly, because they're best explored by doing them. But you have several things that are out there, and the names of these things might change with time, and you find that which works for you and discard that which doesn't. But mind maps, experience maps, storyboards, affinity diagrams, these are things that are popularly used to convey ideas and to handle complex problems, which is what we're talking about. Often when we're talking about design thinking, we're talking about high-order problems, complex problems, problems with ill-defined objectives, with hazy interrelationships and that sort of thing. So first, if we look at mind maps, these are verbal descriptions associated with something. So if you have a product design that you're pursuing, you might say, for example, you're designing a bookshelf, and you might have words that fly off your mind when you think of the bookshelf, and they might be in various categories. For example, it might be what the usage or performance, what does a bookshelf do? It might be durability, how long should it last? It might be the price, it might be safety issues, it might be brand management. It might be aesthetics. And then from each of those categories, other words might derive. And you just write those out. And Visio has some good features that help you support that. And it's just a free-form association of words with an idea or a product. Then you have storyboards. And storyboards can work in a lot of different ways. Traditionally, storyboards are used in movie making and cinematography in many forms, but this is a cartoon. It's got a time domain, so there's a bunch of pictures that move forward in time. So in design, you can look at it, use storyboards for a variety of reasons. Typically, you might use it to describe a user experience. So the user looks at your bookshelf and likes your bookshelf and wants to buy your bookshelf and brings the bookshelf home and puts books on it and enjoys it. You could have a little cartoon that describes each one of those events. And again, it lets you put things into the time domain, so it's very fluid. And interestingly, with so much technology available, storyboarding still is used because it's fast and it's effective and it really conveys ideas. And of course, you can play with the visuals and do many things. In the design process, you're less interested in the in sort of those cinematographic or cartoon concerns with camera angles and direction and that sort of thing. But you are interested in time and the experience, so it's a really good vehicle for that. And then experience maps or journey maps can be coupled right on top of that. And they can go much further than that. For example, you can take a storyboard and put emotional responses for each event, so as to find touch points or pain points, pleasure points, these kind of things. And you can just put a smiley face, a sad face, a growly face with each cartoon. But experience maps can be much more than that. They can be all words with interrelationships described there. They can be pictures, infographics of varying complexity, and we do those in industrial design. And they convey a lot of information in a way that people can wrap their fingers around. Again, a lot of what this involves, this whole design thinking or the design process, is part of this communicating with other people so you can work collaboratively. Just as model making lets you work in real time, often full scale, in a collaborative environment, so can some of these tools help you with that as well. So again, they're graphics, not art, but they do powerful things. And they let people work in a community and look at one point of reference and exchange ideas instead of just sort of sipping coffee and talking about things. You can show them pictorially. So that's very helpful. And affinity diagrams really take that to another level in the sense that when you have complex problems and you're trying to act like a communal artificial neural network, you're trying to say, here's a problem we have and what are solutions to the problem. So this isn't necessarily product design, this could be interaction design, certainly, and many other things. So you have this problem. How do you solve it? Well, that's a really difficult thing to even address. Where do you start? So what affinity diagrams sort of help you do, at least the process of using affinity diagrams, is it says, well, what are random characteristics associated with this problem? So for example, if you are looking at addressing a parking problem, you could say, how do we eliminate this particular parking problem? And people put up a bunch of ideas. And there's many ways to do this. You can create your own ideas, and then independently another person creates their own ideas, using the plural pronoun. And then you put your ideas together, and then you synthesize them. You say, well, you know, we have a bunch of ideas here associated with changing the laws. And then we have a bunch of ideas associated with changing driver behavior. And then we have a bunch of ideas associated with using time, the time component of parking. And we have another category here related to financial incentives. And we have another category related to punitive matters, and so on. And you can see this sort of crystallization of ideas based on random, here's how we fix that problem. So it's really powerful. It can be used in more complex cases. I have one case here, I don't have them up on the wall, where we looked at a personnel decision. What kind of person do you want to hire? And so you ask people to put up their thoughts on what characteristics this person should have. And if you do this randomly, and you can take two individuals, you can take two groups, divide them up, and you get a lot of repetition of ideas. And then you can categorize those again. You're going to find credentials become an issue, leadership capabilities become an issue, past experience, behavioral issues. You'll find these categories arise. And you'll even find, well, you'll find a lot of things that come up. I won't explore that too far at this point. And this synthesization of ideas, the synthesizing of ideas is really important because this is a bunch of noise. This is a bunch of papers. But the ideas are important, and if I just hand somebody these Post-it notes, well, that's not very helpful. But if I process these and I can make some sense out of it. Really powerful stuff. And the reason this is a good segue into design thinking is taking, finding obscure relationships and trying to interrelate these, because in design thinking you're trying to empathize with the user. And again, this is really, you know, a general discussion of the topic because it applies to many things, but you're trying to find obscure relationships and put them together. And it's that insight, the insight into relationships between cause and effect, between these subtle movers of human behavior, these subtle movers of physical behavior, that's very powerful and often very human. And these factors can be sensory, they can be visual, auditory, tactile, these kind of things, but they can be mathematical, they can be other issues too that arise that allow you to make interconnections. If it was easy, this process doesn't help. And it can be more than descriptive, it can be, you know, phenomenological even, and it's a very powerful tool. So design thinking relies on empathy, and we've talked about ethnography before, trying to understand the user requirements, the user perspective, and there's qualitative methods that can really do some good things with that. Now, I mentioned earlier about artificial neural networks, which can take data and find relationships, and they're used a lot in the financial sector. So you can find a lot of metrics associated with the company performance, throw it into an artificial neural networking processing system, and it will find relationships and develop the connectivity of those relationships. And expert systems work in reverse. They're taking rules and using fuzzy logic, saying, well, if this happens, this is most likely outcome. And there's all this artificial intelligence associated with connecting data. Well, in design thinking, you're using your mind or a group's mind, you know, a group of people. So it's again, in summary, it's trying to understand the user requirements, trying to connect obscure data, find obscure relationships, and then using this insight and design patterns to come up with real design solutions. So one of the things that we do, and I'll just read this off here, is as an exercise, is we use an experience map as a vehicle. So for example, we'll take a problem, a consumer issue, for example, buying a gift for Christmas. And you can have the person do this. They can buy a gift at some store and for a Christmas gift, and they can write an experience map of that. Here's what I did to pick out the scarf that I wanted for my mom or whatever, and how I selected it, and write this all up as an experience map, whether it's, you know, whatever form that takes, say a storyboard with some annotations associated with, or some other infographic. And then they can present this to another person, and that other person is sort of the design thinker. He's saying, okay, I see your experience map, and I see what you're portraying here. I'll ask you some questions. I'll truly try to understand what your experience was in buying this scarf for your mother was. And then that's that sort of empathy that I talked about before. And that's where you're bringing a second party in. Now that second party could be a group, but they're saying, okay, let's try to get inside the consumer's head here in this scarf purchasing experience. And then come up with a better way. Identify pain points in this whole experience, whether it's waiting in line to check out or actually finding all the scarves that you want, and maybe it's worrying that you're getting a bad deal. That even when you're happy with what you picked out and you're kind of happy with the price, you're afraid that some other store has it cheaper, and that's in the back of your mind, or that maybe you should do it on the internet because there are so many more options. Those are all issues that can arise, and you want to articulate those if that's what the user was experiencing. And this is most powerful when you're dealing with the other, someone different than you, someone outside your demographic. And so we go through this kind of formal procedure, and then what you can do if you're the designer is then redraw the experience map and see if the first person really likes that change that you've suggested. So anyway, and then we switch people, and one person will talk about their experience in some kind of thing, and the other person will try to improve that system. So design thinking is really important. Again, it goes far beyond product design. It goes into interaction design and all sorts of human experiences. It's important, it's very human, and these vehicles, these communication vehicles that I described are adjuncts to it. Thank you.